So we're recording. And again, first five speeches, these are really about love. When we get to Socrates, he's going to talk about love, eros. We're going to hear a lot of eros, but the topic of conversation broadens quite a bit. Things get very metaphysical, you could say. You might say that's also true of Eryximachus. We might not have time to get to him today. I'm hoping we do, since we already got started on Phaedrus. But Eryximachus, I find his speech the most confusing. There's several ways you can interpret it. He uses a lot of metaphors, and so I tend to spend a lot more time on Eryximachus than I would want to, because of the fact that it's so confusing. But anyway, let's remind ourselves. So each of these men who are speaking, besides Pausanias, we're not quite sure about who he is, what he does for a living. They all have a very specific, position in society. They do certain things for a living, and many commentators of Plato make a big deal about this. And maybe this might guide us in our reading. When we think about where's this speech coming from. Is there anything about Phaedrus's speech, right, that makes it obvious that he's a rhetorician? Maybe it is. So this is a fun way to approach the dialogue. It's definitely not the only way to approach it. But just to review, we started with Phaedrus. He teaches rhetoric. He's a rhetorician. He's almost like the modern day equivalent would be your speech professor, if you've ever taken a speech class in college. Pausanias, he doesn't seem to have any occupation. At least we don't know about it. He doesn't speak about what he does for a living, but he's referred to as Agathon's lover. And he's much younger. He's portrayed as much younger, and I think this does. I would argue with my reading is that this does have an effect or an influence on his speech in praise of love. Now, Eryximachus is a physician. You're going to see this when we get to this at the end of class today, and we start talking about Eryximachus. He uses medical terminology, I'm using that phrase loosely, medical terminology. He's an ancient Greek physician, so it's not the most scientific approach to medicine, but he couches part of his speech in medical terms. He talks about healthy and diseased love. Aristophanes, I have to say, probably the most entertaining of all the speeches, and one of the most fun to read. But I have to say, I have to put my cards on the table, probably my least favorite when it comes to the underlying philosophy behind the speech. His philosophy of love. What is eros, and why should we praise it? We'll get to that probably next class. And same thing with Agathon. We'll leave that till next meeting. But he's like Aristophanes. He's a poet. The last two speeches are by poets. Before we get to Socrates, he's sort of the grand finale. Aristophanes a writer of comedy, whereas Agathon writes tragedy. And I'm not really quite sure if that's that instructive. It's debatable whether or not Aristophanes' speech is comic. In fact, I think it's been a while since I read the introduction to this edition, but I seem to recall that the translators they had this they wrote this introduction, and they seem to think that Aristophanes provides a tragic view of love, whereas Agathon actually provides a more comic or lighthearted view of love or eros. And so kind of the opposite of what you would expect, right? The comedian delivers a tragedy and the tragedian delivers a comedy. But I still think those interpretations are open for debate. But it's always fun to approach a text from different angles, for sure. Let's recall what we were covering at the tail end of class last time, which was the speech of Phaedrus. Does anybody even remember what was his speech all about? I'll help us out a little bit. Remember, he said the first thing he said was that love is the most ancient of the gods, and he draws from I think Hesiod and Parmenides and Acusilus, who's like this ancient genealogist or something. So he's basically appealing to these ancient authorities, these old books. Oh, they all say that at the beginning was chaos, and then came Earth, and then they were all drawn by love, or something like that. This is kind of a flimsy argument, but it's kind of an appeal to authority. We talked about this at the end of class last time. But that's not really, I think, the main point of his praise for love. What he says is, well, it's the most ancient of all gods, and therefore it gives us, or it brings us, the greatest of all goods. It's one of these necessary elements, of the universe, of the cosmos. Eros, love, this god, is a force that brings us to us the greatest good. And what is this good? Does anybody remember? I know it's been a while, and some of you have probably been through your own ordeals, but somebody, Shelley, just put a link here in the comments. She found an audio version of the Symposium. I wonder, it'd be nice to do one with different people doing the different voices. Does it have different actors playing the different parts? That would be fun. If it's just some guy reading it, that's kind of like, I don't know if that's much of a help, but it'd be cool to see it like maybe enacted as like an actual play or something like that. Cool. She says yes. But nobody remembers Phaedrus. What was the point of his speech? He was saying that love it's good. It provides one of the greatest goods. What's so good about it? What does it do to us when we fall in love? Why is it so great?
Was it him that said that love made us brave or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know if he uses the word brave. I think he would, but you're right. It's like it makes us do stuff like be brave. What does it say? It makes us feel shamed at acting shamefully and feel honorable for doing things that are good. So yeah, maybe he does talk about, because I remember he says that like an army of lovers, like if all the people in the army loved each other, like they were all boyfriends or whatever,
Yeah,
that they would like fight for
like
each
a
other.
strong
They'd be like
bond.
the most strongest, bravest army, Um, but yeah, I think that's like page 10 where he talks about that. But yeah, basically that's the gist of it, right? And we were talking about what are some of the problems with this view. So love makes you moral. It makes you do really good things, like be brave and virtuous. Um,
You can also do the opposite, right?
yeah, I think that, yeah. So we were bringing up, yeah, can't it do the opposite? Can't you, maybe because you love somebody? I think he's assuming that maybe you're going to love somebody who is actually virtuous themselves, and so you want to do virtuous deeds. But what if you're like Harley Quinn and you fall in love with the Joker or something? That might inspire you to be like evil or whatever, do bad things. So what about Pausanias? We can go ahead and move on, I guess. I don't want to waste too much time on something we've already covered, since we're already trying to make up for lost time. But Pausanias, so his speech, if you have this version of the book, it's page 13. Otherwise, I know some of you might be using it like an online version. Maybe you found something for free. If it's got the margin numbers in the margins, it's about line 180D, around there. That's where Pausanias begins his speech. Um, and and another thing, and I think I mentioned this last time we met, there's a lot of people who interpret this dialogue as progressive, in the sense that every one of these speeches gets better. So apparently we start out with a very superficial description. That's not to say that there isn't some truth to each of the speeches, but they all get closer and closer to a fully more worked out view of Eros. Obviously, I think that Socrates' speech is supposed to be the best. Maybe it's my own bias that hesitates this interpretation, because I'm not such a fan of the Aristophanes speech. But it's another fun way to look at this dialogue. So let's see if Pausanias is any better than Phaedrus. He seems like he wants to be. He's saying, well, I don't think that our subject has been well defined. He starts by saying that. Our charge has been simple, to speak in praise of love. This would have been fine if love himself were simple too. But as a matter of fact, there are two kinds of love. In view of this, it might be better to begin by making clear which kind of love we are to praise. Let me therefore try to put our discussion back on the right track and explain which kind of love ought to be praised, and then I shall give him the praise he deserves as the God he is. So right off the bat, he's going to distinguish between two types of love. Maybe this is an improvement over Phaedrus. Phaedrus says, oh, love makes you good, it makes you brave. Well, does it always? Sometimes you have love that sends you in the wrong direction. Maybe there's good and bad kinds of love. So where's he going with this? What's Pausanias going to say? He says it's a well-known fact that love and Aphrodite are inseparable. If therefore Aphrodite were a single goddess, there could also be a single love. But since there are actually two goddesses of that name, there are also two kinds of love. I don't expect you'll disagree with me about the two goddesses, will you? One is the older deity, the motherless daughter of Uranus, the god of heaven. She's known as Urania, or heavenly Aphrodite. The other goddess is younger, the daughter of Zeus and Dion. Her name is Pandemos, or common Aphrodite. It follows, therefore, that there is a common as well as a heavenly love, depending on which goddess is love's partner. And although, of course, all the gods must be praised, we must still make an effort to keep these two gods separate. So he seemed to say, like, okay, so there's these two species of love. They're both good, but one's better than the other. We should praise them both, but obviously one is superior to the other. And it might not be super obvious from the passage that I just read, but there's a bit of sexism, I think, underlying Pausanias' speech here. I believe I mentioned this right when we began the symposium. I warned you about this. There's this very historically unique type of homosexuality that's at play here in some of these speeches. This sense of male superiority, and so love between men, this romantic love between men, is characterized as higher than any other form of love. And I mean, I don't know if we want to spend much time on it. If you do, we can, but I think it's kind of distracting. To me, it's sort of ridiculous. You know, he's saying that the heavenly love, when Eros, the god of love, Eros, is bonded with Aphrodite, the older deity, that's the heavenly love. Okay, and this deity, is born without a mother. There's like sort of hints of sexism there. The one that has, part mother and part father, lineage, Zeus and Dion, that's the common Aphrodite. So because it's mixed with woman, it's not quite as good or pure. And so this corresponds to the two species, the two types of love. So for those of you who did the reading, you can maybe tell me if you remember, but even if you didn't do the reading, you might have some clue as to what the distinction is. What do you think the common love is versus the heavenly love? What do you think Pausanias is going to start talking about here? It's on page 14. He's pretty clear about it. You got to give him credit for that. I think that even if you don't agree with his speech, his, I think, is a little bit more clear for sure than Eryximachus. When we get to Eryximachus, it's, as I warned you, it's kind of, I think it's a beautiful poetic speech, but it's kind of confusing. Not kind of clear what he means. But what's Pausanias driving at here? And by the way, I'd never heard of this older Aphrodite. I thought I was pretty well versed in Greek mythology, but Plato. This is the first time I'd ever heard of the ancient Aphrodite. I'm familiar with the younger one, that the common Aphrodite, and you probably are too, even though you might not even be aware of it. You've probably seen images of Aphrodite on her seashell emerging from the ocean, in the nude. Usually she's got this long hair covering up her nipples, so you can't see all the the jiggly bits. But she's supposed to be this beautiful, seductive goddess that no one can no one can resist her seductive charms. She's so beautiful and feminine and all this. And she's often pictured with Cupid or Eros, the god of love. So when those two get together, that's when you get the common love. But whenever Eros is paired with the heavenly, the older deity, which I had never heard of, that's the higher form of love. What do you think the difference is? What's his explanation between the two? Well, I think it's line 181b is where he begins his description of the common Aphrodite. Um, he says the common Aphrodite's love is truly common. As such, he strikes wherever he gets a chance. This, of course, is love felt by the vulgar, who are attached to women no less than boys. There's more of that sexism. Oh, they like women just as much as, lowly women, right? To the body more than to the soul, and to the least intelligent partners, since all they care about is completing the sexual act. Whether they do it honorably or not is of no concern. That is why they do whatever comes their way, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And which one it is incidental to their purpose. For the love who moves them belongs to a much younger goddess, who through her parentage partakes of the nature both of female and male. More male chauvinism there. You have to forgive that, I suppose, or overlook it. But what's the basic point that he's driving at here? I think it's pretty obvious what the common love is, what common Aphrodite's all after. It's all just about sex and getting busy, and I don't care who I have sex with. Just let's get it done. It's all about quantity, not quality. And I want the least intelligent partners and all this stuff. Okay, so if that's what the common Aphrodite is, then what do you think the heavenly form of love is? Shelley says, I think it says the age of the lover. Well, he says something to the effect that the heavenly lover, the common Aphrodite might be attracted to younger, more physically attractive. The heavenly love might also be attracted to physically, but that's not the important part, right? They actually might be attracted to somebody who's older, but why would they be attracted to somebody who's older? Not because of their physical beauty.
Isn't it more like a deep love, like a love of the person, not like the sex?
Right. Yeah. And so
I think that would be the right. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, sorry. I jumped in agreement with all of them.
Yeah. And also, I think Christy, she put wisdom and intelligence, like that. So something that's more, somebody said deep or he also seemed to talk about it being more long term. How does he put it? I'm convinced that a man who falls in love with a man of this age. Oh yeah, because he does talk about. He's like, we don't have to get into the details of this. It's an interesting historical fact, but you had these male suitors in Athens, these older men who would take these younger men under their wing. It's kind of questionable whether Agathon is one of those men. I kind of think he might be. Not Agathon, sorry, Pausanias. That Pausanias might be Agathon's sort of, apprentice or something like this. And a lot of these older men would take advantage of these young boys. They would, seek all sorts of sexual favors from them, but they wouldn't actually teach them anything or apprentice or mentor them really. And so I think he's kind of like in his speech very subtly he's implying that his love with Agathon is deep. He's like, well, I'm convinced that men who are a little bit younger or a little bit older, who have a little bit of facial hair, a little bit of a beard, I'm assuming Pausanias has a little bit of a beard growing in, that these men are prepared to spend the rest of their life with them. He doesn't aim to deceive him, to take advantage of him while he's still young and experienced, and then expose him to ridicule and move on to someone else, right? So this is more of a long-term, I care. I'm not just in it for the sex, right? I'm in it because I actually have this this genuine affection and concern for your well-being. And as people have already pointed out, I'm more attracted to the soul than the body. You know, I'm more attracted to what's inside, the intelligence, the wisdom, than I am the physical beauty that's on the outside. So yeah, Christie added a comment. He says in the book that's why they go over to Socrates. He's wise, and they thought he's gorgeous. Yeah, but he's actually not gorgeous though. Like, he's really an ugly person. So this is kind of ironic. At the very end, and we're going to skip this part, but it's kind of funny, the last speech with Alcibiades, when Alcibiades shows up all drunk with all his sort of party to crash everything, and he's got a big crush on Socrates, and Alcibiades is a rich, young, good-looking guy, and he keeps trying to come on to Socrates, and Socrates will have none of it, you know. And I think this is, to me, more like character development. Again, just like the introduction, we were introduced to Socrates, who was not concerned with the dinner party. He wasn't concerned. He was like stopping to contemplate truth. He was in the neighbor's yard looking at their wind chimes, you know, comparing the wind chimes to the movement of the stars or whatever the heck he was doing, you know. And I think, again, at the end, you hear about him, you know, resisting Alcibiades' advances, and how all the young men, they all come close to him. Like, their youth and their beauty is attracted to his inner, like, beauty, his beautiful soul, his wise soul, you know. So you're right to point that out. But yeah, I think we've kind of got the gist of Pausanias here. And again, you might argue that this is a step above Phaedrus. Phaedrus is like, well, love unequivocally makes you a better person. Maybe if we add this sort of caveat and say, well, no, if it's the heavenly love, maybe, and you're attracted to their soul and a wise soul, then that might inspire you to be good. But if it's just this common love, then maybe not so much. Yeah. So there's a couple of things I want to cover though before we move on to the next speech. And I skipped. There's the second paragraph. I'm looking at the wrong book. The second paragraph here in the Speech of Pausanias. So it's at the bottom of page 13. Before he gets into that section I just read, before he gets into distinguishing between the common and the heavenly love, he starts off by saying, well, love in itself, it's not good or bad, it's how it's done. And he makes this point about quite a few things. He says that drinking, singing, dancing, that none of these activities are really good or bad in themselves. It depends on the manner in which they're performed. So I'd like to read this passage because I find it somewhat problematic and in need of explanation. And there's one more other thing I'd like to read as well. Is there for Pausanias? No, I don't think so. I think that's it. There's one last thing, and then we can move on to Eryximachus. I'll double check, but I think this is it. Let's read this paragraph. So again, if you've got a different version, it's around line 181a. So he says the reason for this, the reason why, some love is different, some should be praised, some should be not praised so much. The reason is the same for every type of action. Be careful when you hear the word every, or always, or never, for that matter. If you hear a philosopher or anybody say never or always, or it's always the case, you can usually just easily refute them by pointing to one example that contradicts their claim. And I think that's what's going to get him into trouble here. So think about that, right? He says, so no action, right? This is true for every type of action. He says, considered in itself, no action is either good or bad, honorable or shameful. Take, for example, our own case. We had a choice between drinking, singing, or having a conversation. Now, in itself, none of these is better than any other. How it comes out depends entirely on how it is performed. If it is done honorably and properly, it turns out to be honorable. If it is done improperly, it is disgraceful. And my point is that exactly this principle applies to being in love. Love is not in himself noble and worthy of praise. That depends on whether the sentiments he produces in us are themselves noble. So love is good if it's the heavenly, not so good if it's the common. I guess is his point. But this overall point that he's making about how no action, this is true of anything you could do, is really bad in itself. It's how you do it. If you drink, I guess if you drink a certain way and you get like completely loaded and act like an idiot and embarrass yourself, then that's bad. But if you just get drunk and you have fun and it's not super drunk and you're not hungover the next day, you have just the right amount, it doesn't really affect your health horribly, then that's good, right? But does this apply to everything, you think? So no matter what you do, neither good or bad, depends on how you do it. Can you think of a counterexample? There's something that might not, fit this framework. Any action is good as long as it's done honorably and not shamefully, properly, right? Yeah, there you go. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, Shelley's got it in the comments. I was thinking murder, but yeah, rape as well, right? Rape, murder, child abuse. Running somebody over with a car for fun. Like none of those things. I guess that's just a kind of murder. So you kind of hit that, but yeah. So none of those seem like they could ever be done correctly or right or something like this, So what I'm assuming he's basing this sort of assumption off of is kind of cultural. You see here, I have written on the slide this phrase, principle of the golden mean, and I have Aristotle's name in parentheses. In Greek culture, and I think ancient Greek culture is often portrayed by modern, by us moderns, by contemporaries, as very hedonistic and they were wild and their sexuality was a lot more frank and in your face and open than Western, kind of Judeo-Christian cultures. And I think that's over exaggerated to a certain extent. They were probably not as puritanical in many regards. Like there's nothing wrong with sex. There's nothing wrong with getting drunk or whatever. That wasn't shunned by their religion. But they had this notion of moderation. What some scholars refer to as the principle of the golden mean, and which Aristotle writes about extensively. And the idea is that really, as long as you don't overdo it, then it's fine. And you don't want to underdo it either. If you never have any fun at all, you never drink, you never, have, fun in bed or whatever, you got to live your life. It's almost seen as a sin not to indulge, but it's also a sin to overindulge. So you got to find that balance, that golden mean. And again, Aristotle wrote extensively about it. He's often even credited with it, but it's really a part of Greek culture, ancient Greek culture. How far back it goes is rather contentious. So maybe this is what Pausanias is guided by. But even Aristotle admits that not everything is such, right? Aristotle talks about stealing and committing adultery. He says that you don't want to be moderately good at stealing or moderately good at committing adultery. You want to be deficient at that. You don't want to do it at all. So this principle doesn't apply to everything, the way that Pausanias seems to be suggesting here. Let's see here. I want to make sure I don't skip anything. Actually, yeah, there is. It's on page 16. I thought this was Phaedrus that had said this, but this is a point that Pausanias makes. And this is on page 16. It's around line 182e. He makes this point about the kind of things that the kind of actions that we actually not only justify, but seem to encourage in regards to people who are in love. So if somebody is in love with somebody else, we'll sort of allow them to do all sorts of things and all sorts of actions and things that we normally wouldn't for any other reason. I don't think I'm being very good at explaining this, so maybe I should just read the passage. But I want to say, like, before I read it, I think in a way he's kind of right that there is this sort of cultural tendency to, as he puts it, forgive the lover for all sorts of crazy things to do, doing all sorts of crazy things for love. But I honestly think this is more true in fairy tales, in movies, in popular conceptions of love. But like in real life, I don't think that this is really true. So I'd be curious to hear what some of you have to say about this. But let me read the passage so you know what the heck I'm talking about. Again, this is around line 182e. He says, recall also that a lover is encouraged in every possible way. This means that what he does is not considered shameful. On the contrary, conquest is deemed noble, and failure shameful. And as for attempts at conquest, our custom is to praise lovers for totally extraordinary acts. So extraordinary, in fact, that if they performed them for any other purpose whatever, they would reap the most profound contempt. Suppose, for example, that in order to secure money, or a public post, or any other practical benefit from another person, a man were willing to do what lovers do for the ones they love. Imagine that in pressing his suit, he went to his knees in public view and begged in the most humiliating way, that he swore all sorts of vows, that he spent the night at the other man's doorstep, that he were anxious to provide services even a slave would have refused. Well, you can be sure that everyone, his enemies no less than his friends, would stand in his way. His enemies would jeer at his fawning servility, while his friends, ashamed on his behalf, would try everything to bring him back to his senses. But let a lover act in any of these ways, and everyone will immediately say, what a charming man he is. No blame attaches to his behavior. Custom treats it as noble through and through. And what is even more remarkable is that, at least according to popular wisdom, the gods will forgive a lover even for breaking his vows. A lover's vow, our people say, is no vow at all. The freedom given to the lover by gods and men, according to our custom, is immense. So again, we allow certain behaviors in lovers. If someone's in love with somebody, we almost praise this behavior, whereas we would actually it'd be detestable if they did it for any other reason. He's mentioning begging for money, or for a job, or for a post in the Senate, or some sort of public office or something. If somebody was begging in public on their knees, please give me the job, I'll do anything for you, then it's like repugnant. We're like, oh, that's just undignified. But if somebody's on their knees like, I can't live my life without you, please stay with me, I love you so much, you're the only thing for me, you're my you're my heart and soul, and all this stuff, we look at that and we're like, oh, how romantic, that's so sweet. What do you think? I don't think this is true, actually. I think it's only true in the movies. Like, people do that in real life, what happens? I think a good example of a more realistic portrayal of what actually happens in these scenarios is, oh, I like Shelley's comment. Ooh, I don't like that. Yuck. And yuck is in all capitals. Yeah, exactly. She kind of got the gist of it. But I was gonna mention. I don't know if any of you watched Looney Tunes growing up, but I remember watching Pepe Le Pew. Anybody remember Pepe Le Pew? He's this skunk who falls in love with the cat, and you can imagine, and he's this very romantic skunk, you know. I love you, but he's got a French accent, you know. Mademoiselle, my flower, my how do you say darling in France in French? Mon ami's your friend, or mon amour, I guess, is your love. But oh, mon chéri, you know. Well, what happens? Does that make him endearing to the woman or the cat, I guess, that he's pursuing? No, she's like, back off. This is crazy. This is creepy. This is, yeah. There was a famous scene from this movie in the 80s. And this is typical of romantic comedies. I think romantic rom-coms, romantic comedies, they try to sell you on this, but I think Shelley's reaction is more accurate. You know, it's this is bullshit. It only works in the movies. But there's a movie called Say Anything. There's a scene where the boyfriend, I think he gets dumped, and so like he can't take it anymore. He needs his woman back. So he goes to her house like in the middle of the night, like at 3 a.m. and he like has this big blue boom box, and he plays this song that they used to have sex to this song, and he plays this song and he holds the boom box over his head, and the woman comes out on the balcony and she's like, oh, she starts crying, and like she's like tempted to go down there, but she's like, no, we've got to stay apart. And and every woman that I've known that ever, like, they love that movie and that scene, they're like, oh, I want a man like that, I want somebody to love me like that. I'm like, no, you don't. You're just getting lost in the movie. If that happened in real life, and then all of a sudden the cat is part of the Me Too movement, that wouldn't fly these days. Yeah, exactly. Right. That's the thing. There's tons of scenes. I just saw this clip. I never saw the movie, but I saw a clip from what's it called? Hitch. It's got Will Smith, and he basically meets this woman in a bar, and all he gets is her name. He doesn't get her phone number. He kind of flirts with her. I mean, you can kind of tell she's interested because he's real smooth and suave, and he's Will Smith, but he doesn't get her number or anything. He just finds out like what she does for a living and her name. And then the next day, it cuts to like the next day, and she's at work, and she gets a package from the FedEx guy, and and she opens the box, and it's like a walkie-talkie, like a little kid, like a Fisher Price walkie-talkie, like a little 12-year-old would use. And he's talking to her. He's like, hey, what's up? Remember me from the bar? And all her friends at work are like excited. Like, he's like, you want to go out Saturday? She's like, well, I have plans Saturday. And she's like playing hard to get. She's not creeped out like Shelley's like, what? Like, and it works, I think, because the movie is very well, it's stylized, and Will Smith is so suave and all this. But you got all these women, they're like, yeah, say yes, and finally she says yes to going out with him on this Sunday or whatever. But yeah, in real life they'd be calling the security guard and like, what the hell, this guy's stalking me, and this. So I don't really know if Pausanias is absolutely correct here. I did see some viral video, and you can never know. Some of these viral videos are like obviously staged. This one, it was hard to tell if it was staged or not, but it was this guy who was like proposing to this woman in public. He was in a shopping mall, and he gets on his knees to ask her to marry him. And everyone stops, and they're like kind of cheering him on, and they're like, yeah, they're like, so they do have this reaction. They're all very like, oh, how romantic, how sweet, say yes, say yes. They're all like cheering him on, cheering her on, and she ends up saying no. She's like, I'm sorry, and then she like runs off and walks off, and he's like devastated. He's like, but yeah, the audience was all like into it, at least in the video they were. Again, who knows how staged that was going to be. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of call bullshit on Pausanias here. I think that, when you go watch a movie and you see it on the stage, yeah, it kind of works. But in real life, you get the Shelley, ew, reaction, usually. Unless it does work. I think romantic gestures work if you're already interested. If there's already a a connection. There's already maybe you've already gone on a date or two, or you already like each other, you know, or it's your, you know, maybe you're already a Will Smith fan and Will Smith is talking to you. Then yeah, of course you're gonna fall for it. But you know, in real life, this is not, you know, this is not realistic. This is storybook stuff. Okay, well, let's talk about Eryximachus, and let's see if we can at least get through this speech here. I'd like to try to get through Aristophanes, but I don't know if we're going to have time. Let's look at the beginning here of the speech, and in a way, he sort of picks up on a thread that Pausanias starts, right, with this distinction between a common and a heavenly love, except he turns it into or he puts a medical spin on it, and he you know, kind of reinterprets it as healthy versus diseased love. And also, maybe this is the other reason why Eryximachus' speech is a bit more obscure and hard to pin down and really understand what he's getting at, is because he seems to broaden the scope of what we would normally understand by the term love in the erotic sense. Remember, you know, the Greeks had several words that could be translated as love. We're talking about eros, so a romantic, you know, sort of, you're drawn to someone physically. You know, you want to be near them. You know, there's a sexual element to it. But Eryximachus, he, you know, and obviously with Pausanias and Phaedrus, that's there. It's a very human, a human sort of down to earth speech in praise of love. But Eryximachus, it becomes cosmic. You know, he broadens the scope of what we might be thinking of when we think of this force of nature, you know, if it's such a thing as that, you know, this emotion that we feel. He writes, and again, if you're dealing with a different translation, this is around line 186a. He says, Pausanias introduced a crucial consideration in his speech, though in my opinion, he did not develop it sufficiently. Let me therefore try to carry his argument to its logical conclusion. His distinction between the two species of love seems to me very useful indeed. But if I have learned a single lesson from my own field, the science of medicine, it is that love does not occur only in the human soul. Okay, so it's not just something we humans deal with in our own soul, our own feelings, but it's a broader phenomenon. Sorry, I'm readjusting my seat here. It's not simply the attraction we feel toward human beauty, it is a significantly broader phenomenon. It certainly occurs within the animal kingdom and even in the world of plants. In fact, it occurs everywhere in the universe. So it's a universal force. Love is everywhere, right? Sounds kind of hippie-ish in a way, right? Love is a deity of the greatest importance. He directs everything that occurs, not only in the human domain, but also in that of the gods. Okay, so this is making love out to be a big deal. Love guides everything in the entire universe. Everything that we see, all the different phenomenon in nature, in the world of animals, the world of plants, even the gods are guided by love. As far as I can tell, there's not much of an argument here. I'm going to get into, you know, he's going to explain himself as best he can, I suppose. But I'm missing it, but it doesn't seem like he even provides an argument for any of this stuff. At least Pausanias and Phaedrus seem to provide arguments for their view of love. They give examples. They might not be good arguments, but they're at least arguments. With Eryximachus, it seems to be just a very descriptive speech. Here's what love is. Here's what it does. Here's the nature of it. Here's why it's great and how it guides all these things and directs all these things, whether it's human beings or plants or animals, or he even says that it guides musicians and poets and all this. She says, let me begin with some remarks concerning medicine. I hope you'll forgive me giving pride of place to my own profession. The point is that our very bodies manifest the two species of love. Consider for a moment the marked difference, the radical dissimilarity between healthy and diseased constitutions, and the fact that dissimilar subjects desire and love objects that are themselves dissimilar. Therefore, the love manifested in health is fundamentally distinct from the love manifested in disease. And now recall that, as Pausanias claimed, it is honorable to yield to a good man as it is shameful to consort with the debauched. Well, to my point is the case is that the case of the human body is strictly parallel. Okay, so if we love somebody who is debauched and who is a bad person, that's bad love. That might lead to the common sort of love, and we get misled and deceived. It's deceitful. They just want us for superficial reasons. But if we're guided by the higher love, this is a healthier one. I guess this is what he says. He's not that clear about it. Maybe he's, to me, maybe one of the best interpretations that I've heard was from one of my students who said, well, I don't think he's changing Pausanias' definition. He's just adding to it. And so, you know, healthy love and disease love is the same thing as the heavenly versus the common. But how does this apply to medicine? How is Eros involved in medicine? So between human beings, we want to consort with others who will make us better people. I'm not quite sure. He says that dissimilar subjects desire objects that are dissimilar. That makes me think that opposites attract. And when he starts talking about medicine, and medicine being a sort of balancing of elements, then that sort of makes me want to apply it to human beings as well. Okay, and maybe I should explain before we get to this long passage on the next page a little bit about ancient medicine and how it was practiced, at least by the Greeks and many other ancient cultures. But there was a popular conception of disease as an imbalance of the elements that we're made of. So human beings are made of, some parts of us are hot, some parts of us are cold, some parts of us are dry, some parts of us are wet. So we're composed of all these opposing elements. And one theory that these early physicians were operating under was the assumption that any amount of disease or any amount of unhealthiness was a result of an imbalance of these elements. So if you had a fever, too much hot, you need more cold to balance out that heat. If you maybe you had a dry mouth or something like that, or strep throat, you weren't wet enough, you needed to be hydrated or something like that, or vice versa if it was another condition. So that was one way that physicians approached medicine. It seems like Eryximachus is practicing medicine that way. It seems pretty obvious in the next couple passages that that's what that's how he practices medicine. And so when he's doing this to the human body, he compares this to human love, right? Finding love between these opposing elements in the body is the same sort of thing on, I guess, a microscopic level or this sort of medical level as the human love, the attraction that we feel for someone dissimilar to us, I'm assuming. He's very vague about this, I have to admit. But that's what I'm taking away from it. I'd be more than happy to hear anybody else who might have a different idea or interpretation of what they think might be going on with Eryximachus. But he says, my point is that the case of the human body is strictly parallel. Everything sound and healthy in the body must be encouraged and gratified, and that is precisely the object of medicine. Conversely, whatever is unhealthy and unsound must be frustrated and rebuffed, and that is what it is to be an expert in medicine. In short, medicine is simply the science of the effects of love on repletion and depletion of the body. And the hallmark of the accomplished physician is his ability to distinguish the love that is noble from the love that is ugly and disgraceful. A good practitioner knows how to affect the body and how to transform its desires. He can implant the proper species of love when it is absent and eliminate the other sort whenever it occurs. The physician's task is to effect a reconciliation and establish mutual love between the most basic bodily elements. Which are those elements? Well, they are, of course, those that are the most opposed to one another. As hot is to cold, bitter to sweet, wet to dry, cases like those. In fact, our ancestor Asclepius was the god of medicine, you know, the demigod of medicine, the sort of patron saint of Greek medicine. He first established medicine as a profession when he learned how to produce concord and love between such opposites. And that's what the poet fellows say, and this time I concur with them. So again, medicine, healing, as finding a balance between opposing elements in our body. This is what medicine does, and that's love. That's love within the individual. Love between people. Again, he's not that clear about it. He doesn't give us any examples. What I can take from this, what I'm guessing, my interpretation, my reading is again that opposites attract. You know, that maybe your lover, the person you love, should be complementary to you. They're dissimilar, but maybe you're assertive and they're passive, or maybe you're outgoing and they're more of an introvert, or maybe you're really loud and they're quiet, and so you help each other balance each other out. You know, maybe one of you's kind of scared and afraid of going out in public, and so the person who's extrovert helps the other person. But if you had two people who were both hot-headed and both very assertive, that maybe that wouldn't work, right? That kind of relationship wouldn't work. So again, I don't know, a balancing of different character types. This is what a good love would look like. Or again, maybe he's just ripping off Pausanias and adding to it. Healthy love is one that is focused on the soul and the well-being of the lover, whereas unhealthy is just more lust and more just all about sex, and that's sort of the main concern. But then he starts making these references to music. This is kind of interesting. I don't want to dwell on this too much, but let's read a little bit of this. He says, medicine, therefore, is guided everywhere by the God of love, and so are physical education and farming. He'll get to that in a minute. Physical education, farming. Even these, all of these are guided by love. Further, a moment's reflection suffices to show that the case of poetry and music, too, is precisely the same. Music, poetry, they're guided by love. They all involve a reconciliation of opposing elements, hot, cold, wet, dry, and the proper balancing of these elements. So he says that indeed this may have been just what Heraclitus had in mind, although his mode of expression certainly leaves much to be desired. The one, he says, being at variance with itself, is in agreement with itself, like the attunement of a bow or a lyre. So a bow, you know, like a bow and arrow, a lyre is a musical instrument. It's also stringed. He's referencing Heraclitus here, who is a very ancient Greek philosopher, way before Socrates even. He's, you know, referred to as a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher. We think he lived around 7th or 8th century BC. And quite a few of his fragments have survived, and they're very enigmatic, very mysterious. He seemed to think of the universe as a place of constant flux. Everything in the universe is always changing. It's never in an absolutely stable condition. One of his most famous quotes probably is that you never step in the same river twice. You know, why don't you ever step in the same river twice? That seems false. I've been to the Guadalupe River several times in my life. Well, I guess it's never the same river because the water is always changing and always flowing. But there's something that holds it together, the two opposing riverbanks. So the universe is like the river. It's always flowing. It's always changing. The elements that make it up are never in a stable state. But yet there is some order to it. There's as Heraclitus puts it, there's a logos. The Greek word logos, it can mean well, it's the Greek word for word. It's the Greek word for plan, for account, for scheme, explanation. science of, examination of. But for Heraclitus, the logos was a way the universe was. It was the flow and the way of the universe, and there was an order to it that was constantly changing, but that could be recognized by the philosopher, just like you could follow the flow of the river. Even though the river's changing, again, it's held together by tension, by strife, just like the tension on the bow or the lyre, as he puts it. So to me, this kind of feeds into my interpretation of this passage that, for Eryximachus, love is a balancing of opposites. That's a very Heraclitean way of looking at things. You've got chaos, flux, things are always flowing, and tension, strife, order. These two elements balance the universe and keep it from being just absolutely, indecipherable and no order whatsoever. There is a certain flow, just like there's a certain flow to a river. A lot of similarities here with the Chinese philosophy of Taoism, if anyone's familiar with that, the notion of the yin and the yang. You've got these opposite forces of the universe, the yin being the feminine, the dark, the mysterious, the submissive, the yang or yang being the bright, the assertive, the masculine, the creative force. Some of that's, you could argue, sexist or whatever, but that's the ancient sort of Chinese notion of yin and yang. And I think that's something that Heraclitus didn't know about, but there's a lot of parallels in his thought. And Eryximachus seems to be drawing from that, right? That he uses this quote: "The one, the universe, all that is, being at variance with itself, having this tension, this strife, being at variance with itself, is actually in agreement with itself." So even though there's this tension or these two opposite or opposing forces, they complement one another, much like the yin and the yang, right? That they're different, but they need each other. They complement one, they complete each other, and there's a balance between the two. This is love, I suppose, in Eryximachus's mind. And I'm going to skip over the musical analogies that he makes, right? He talks about discordance, which is, when you have two musical notes that don't quite go together, that they kind of are unsettling. A musical composer will use those and use that unsettling sound of dissonance and discordance to cause uneasiness in the listener, but then resolves it with a nice harmonious resolution. And then there's this sort of and so there's this tension and resolve. And this is, I guess, this is in music, and it's good for music. This is love. This is eros in musical composition. I'm skipping quite a bit here at the bottom of 22 because we're running out of time. We've only got like 3 or 4 minutes left. In fact, I'm going to run through this pretty quick. He says that on 188a, in music as well as medicine and all other domains, in matters divine as well as human affairs, we must attend with the greatest possible care to these two species of love, which are indeed to be found everywhere. Even the seasons of the year exhibit their influence. When the elements to which I've already referred to, hot and cold, wet and dry, are animated by the proper species of love, they are in harmony with one another. Their mixture is temperate, and so is the climate. Harvests are plentiful. Men and all other living things are in good health. No harm can come to them. But when this sort of love that is crude and impulsive controls the seasons, he brings death and destruction. I guess this is the winter months, right? The harsh, cold months, right? This is really appropriate from what we just lived through this last couple of weeks, right? He spreads the plague and many other diseases among plants and animals. He causes frost and hail and blights. All these are effects of the immodest and disordered species of love, right? So when the season is good and it's springtime, that's when all these elements are balanced. That's the healthy love. And then the winter, it's this decrepit disease love, right? Also, one last thing before we part today, divination, our relationship with the gods, right? He says, consider the rites of sacrifice, the whole area with which the art of divination is concerned. That is the interaction between men and gods. Here too, love is the central concern. So when the ancient Greeks were, sacrificing, burning a sacrifice at the altar to their god, or the goddess or whoever they were sacrificing. That was an act of love, sort of balancing between these opposing forces, the force of mortality, the mortals, and the immortal gods, these opposite things. Love is what sort of bridges the gap between them through religion, through, the Greeks had their sacrifice and their rites and their rituals. Christians could have prayers or whatever, but these are all the same thing, right? They're all eros. They're all this driving force, which is cosmic throughout the whole entire universe. Anyway, I've got 2 minutes to kill. I don't want to push it too far, so I'm going to go and end the meeting there. Let me stick around, especially if you got here a little bit late. Stick around. I'm going to stop recording.